Silence can be louder than violence. It settles into classrooms, courtrooms, and neighborhoods so completely that people begin to mistake it for order. In the United States, that silence wrapped itself around injustice and called it normal. And one man, newly arrived, heard it immediately. Albert Einstein did not come to America looking for a cause. He came looking for safety. In 1933, when Adolf Hitler rose to power in Germany, Einstein was already a marked man. His Jewish identity, his refusal to submit to nationalist ideology, and his international prominence made return impossible. The country that had once celebrated his genius had turned his name into a target. So he stayed in the United States and settled in Princeton, New Jersey, carrying with him the memory of what happens when prejudice is allowed to harden into law. Princeton appeared calm, educated, respectable. The streets were orderly, the institutions well-funded, the language of civility carefully maintained. But beneath that surface lived a system Einstein recognized immediately. African Americans were confined to the margins of the town. Housing was segregated. Schools were separated and unequal. There was no high school available for black children in Princeton until the 1940s. Public spaces enforced invisible lines with practiced ease. Einstein did not need an introduction to this kind of structure. He had seen it before. Walking through Princeton, he began spending time in black neighborhoods without announcement. He stood on porches. He listened. Children knew him as the man who brought candy and asked questions. Adults noticed something else. He did not speak down. He did not perform sympathy. He spoke plainly, as someone who understood what it meant to live under rules designed to diminish you. One afternoon, speaking quietly to a neighbor, he said, "This is familiar." The statement was not explanatory. It did not need to be. Einstein's early life in Europe had taught him how societies justify exclusion. Born in 1879 in Ulm, Germany, into a Jewish family, he grew up in a continent that tolerated Jewish success only conditionally. Universities could admire Jewish intellect, while political movements sharpened resentment. As anti-Semitism intensified, Einstein learned that intelligence did not grant protection. It often increased suspicion. When the Nazi regime stripped Jews of rights and dignity, Einstein saw where silence led. That memory did not fade when he crossed the Atlantic. It sharpened. In the early 1930s, even before he became a permanent resident of the United States, Einstein began aligning himself with African American struggles. In 1931, he joined a protest committee organized by Theodore Dreiser to challenge the convictions of the Scottsboro Boys, 9 black teenagers falsely accused and rushed through a legal process designed to confirm guilt rather than discover truth. Einstein did not join quietly. He understood that courts, when captured by prejudice, became instruments of terror. That same year, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois invited Einstein to write for The Crisis, the publication of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Einstein accepted. He addressed African Americans directly, urging them not to internalize the hatred directed at them. He argued that emancipation was not only legal, but psychological, and that dignity could not be surrendered to those who denied it. He did not write as an observer. He wrote as someone who had watched lies become policy. By the time Einstein settled fully into life in Princeton, his involvement had moved beyond words. He invested personally. When a young black resident needed help attending college, Einstein paid the tuition without public acknowledgement. He understood that opportunity was not philosophical. It was practical. In April 1937, that understanding became visible. Marian arrived in Princeton to perform. Her voice filled the hall. The audience rose. Applause lingered. And then, after the music ended, The Nassau Inn refused her a room because she was black. The policy was routine. The insult was casual. When Einstein learned what had happened, he did not debate it. He invited Marian Anderson to stay in his home. She accepted. The act required no speech. It required no explanation. It was a direct refusal to participate in humiliation. That night marked the beginning of a friendship that lasted until Einstein's death. Whenever Marian Anderson returned to Princeton, she stayed with him. Einstein did not announce the gesture. Others did. As the 1930s gave way to the 1940s, the world burned and then paused. World War II ended. Camps were liberated. The language of human rights entered public conversation. And yet, in the United States, segregation remained intact. Lynching continued. Black veterans returned home only to be beaten or killed for asserting the rights they had defended abroad. Einstein did not mistake victory over fascism for justice. In 1946, he wrote an essay titled The Negro Question, published in Pageant magazine. It was directed primarily at white Americans. In it, Einstein called racism the worst disease in the nation. He traced it directly to slavery and exploitation, challenging readers to confront an inheritance they preferred to ignore. He wrote without comfort, without apology. Later that year, Einstein accepted an invitation to speak at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, a historically black institution. He rarely accepted speaking engagements. He accepted this one. Standing before black graduates and faculty, he said plainly, "The separation of the races is not a disease of colored people. It is a disease of white people. I do not intend to be quiet about it." The black press carried the words widely. The mainstream press largely ignored them. Einstein noticed. He did not adjust his message. By the end of 1946, Einstein had agreed to serve as co-chairman of the American Crusade to End Lynching, alongside Paul Robeson. The organization sought federal action against racial terror at a time when lynching surged across the country. When illness prevented Einstein from attending a major rally, he wrote a letter to President Harry Truman condemning lynching as a stain on American democracy. Paul Robeson delivered it personally. The Federal Bureau of Investigation opened a file. Einstein did not retreat. In 1951, when William Edward Burghardt Du Bois was indicted under the McCarran Act as an unregistered foreign agent facing prison in his 80s, Einstein offered to testify as a character witness. The judge dismissed the case before Einstein took the stand. The message was unmistakable. Some authority cannot be silenced. Albert Einstein did not frame his actions as heroism. He framed them as obligation. He understood that intelligence without courage was incomplete, and that silence, when injustice is visible, becomes participation. The final years of his life would test that conviction further. Power rarely announces itself with noise. More often, it tightens quietly through files, committees, and watchful eyes that pretend neutrality while measuring loyalty. Albert Einstein felt that tightening in America, just as he had in Europe. The language was different. The structure was familiar. By the late 1940s, Einstein was no longer merely a refugee scientist living quietly in Princeton. He had become a public figure whose moral positions carried weight. And weight attracts scrutiny. His association with African American leaders did not go unnoticed. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had begun tracking Paul Robeson closely. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois was already considered suspect by federal authorities for his outspoken critiques of American racism and imperialism. When Einstein aligned himself openly with these men, his name entered the same files. Surveillance followed. Correspondence was noted. Associations were logged. Einstein understood exactly what this meant. He had lived through the consequences of silence before. When friends cautioned him about the risks of continued involvement, he did not argue. He did not debate strategy aloud. He responded simply, "If I remain silent now, I become part of the problem." That line was not a slogan. It was a conclusion reached long ago. In Princeton, Einstein's daily life continued with outward simplicity. He walked without guards. He wore worn clothing. He welcomed visitors without ceremony. But beneath that calm surface, he was increasingly deliberate about how and where he spoke. He did not attend rallies for attention. He did not write statements for applause. He intervened when intervention mattered. In private correspondence, Einstein described American racism as something uniquely dangerous because it hid behind democracy. Unlike Europe's open brutality, America's racial hierarchy wrapped itself in law, custom, and politeness. It convinced the majority that injustice was accidental rather than engineered. Einstein rejected that framing. In conversations with African American students and scholars who visited his home, he spoke candidly. Sitting at his kitchen table, he said, "Prejudice is learned. It is passed like inheritance, and it is defended as tradition." There was no flourish in his voice, only recognition. He encouraged young Black intellectuals not to wait for validation from institutions that had already decided their worth. "If you wait for permission," he told one student quietly, "you will wait forever." That advice was not theoretical. It came from experience. As the Cold War intensified, dissent of any kind became suspect. Advocacy for racial justice was increasingly framed as subversive. Organizations that challenged segregation were labeled radical. Those who associated with them were watched. Einstein refused to separate civil rights from democracy. In public statements, he argued that a nation could not claim moral authority abroad while denying basic rights at home. He linked the treatment of African Americans directly to America's credibility in the world. This connection unsettled policymakers who preferred to compartmentalize injustice. In one conversation, reflecting on the post-war world, Einstein said, "You cannot fight tyranny elsewhere while practicing it quietly at home." Again, the statement carried no theatrics. It carried consequence. His support for the American crusade to end lynching intensified during this period. Lynching, despite national embarrassment, persisted as a tool of racial terror. Einstein viewed it not as a relic, but as evidence that American law was selective in its protection. When asked why he continued to involve himself despite illness and age, he responded, "There are moments when neutrality becomes betrayal." That belief guided him when William Edward Burghardt Du Bois faced prosecution. The indictment was meant to humiliate, to isolate, to send a message. Einstein recognized the tactic immediately. He had seen it in Germany when intellectuals were criminalized for dissent. By offering to testify as a character witness, Einstein forced the court into an uncomfortable position. The case collapsed before he took the stand. The implication was clear. Some figures carried authority that could not be easily neutralized. But authority came with cost. Einstein's political positions narrowed his acceptability in elite circles. Invitations diminished, public praise cooled. He was increasingly described as naive, radical, or misguided by commentators who had never experienced exclusion firsthand. Einstein accepted the isolation. He had long ago decided that acceptance was not the goal. As the 1950s progressed, Einstein's health declined. His movements slowed, his public appearances became rarer. But his convictions did not soften. He continued corresponding with African American leaders. He continued supporting causes quietly. He continued refusing honors that conflicted with his values. When asked once why he did not focus solely on science in his later years, he answered plainly, "Knowledge does not absolve responsibility." That sentence carried everything he believed. Einstein understood that intelligence without moral courage was incomplete. He understood that systems persist when good people convince themselves they are powerless. And he understood that history judges silence more harshly than error. In the final years of his life, he spoke less. But when he spoke, the meaning carried farther. The world was changing again. Legal challenges to segregation were mounting. New generations of African Americans were refusing patience. The language of civil rights was sharpening. Einstein watched these developments not as an outsider, but as someone who recognized the pattern of awakening. He did not live to see the victories that followed, but he had already chosen his side. And that choice, made without coercion, without benefit, and without retreat, would define how his legacy was understood far beyond physics. Silence has a way of clarifying things when time runs out. In the final years of Albert Einstein's life, there was no urgency left in his schedule, only intention. His body had slowed, but his clarity had not. He lived simply in Princeton, New Jersey, walking familiar paths, receiving fewer visitors, speaking less often. But when he did speak, it was never to hedge. It was to confirm what he had already decided long ago. The world around him was shifting again. Legal challenges to segregation were beginning to fracture the foundation of Jim Crow. Black Americans were no longer asking quietly. Courtrooms, buses, schools, and streets were becoming sites of confrontation. The language of civil rights was sharpening into demand. For many white Americans, this shift felt sudden. For Einstein, it felt inevitable. He had seen the pattern before. In Europe, he had watched how injustice hardens when it is tolerated, and how power responds only when pressure becomes unavoidable. He understood that moral progress does not come from persuasion alone. It comes from refusal. Refusal to accept inherited lies. Refusal to participate in silence. Refusal to confuse order with justice. Einstein did not frame these insights as prophecy. He framed them as observation. Sitting with visitors in his modest home, he spoke without ceremony. "The danger," he said quietly, "is not the hatred itself. It is how easily people learn to live beside it." There was no anger in his voice, only recognition. By this point, Einstein's alignment with African American struggles was no longer a matter of public debate. It was part of the record. He had written, he had spoken, he had acted. He had placed his name where it could not be retracted, and his reputation where it could be tested. He had paid a price for that consistency. Surveillance never fully ceased. Associations remained suspect. Invitations from certain institutions dried up. Praise from mainstream power cooled. Einstein accepted this without bitterness. He had long since stopped measuring his life by approval. "I have no patience for comfort that requires silence," he told a friend. That sentence did not ask to be remembered. It simply explained his posture. In conversations with African American scholars during these years, Einstein emphasized something that surprised some of them. He did not speak about hope. He spoke about responsibility. He cautioned against believing that progress, once begun, would sustain itself automatically. "Justice," he said, "does not run on memory. It runs on pressure." That pressure, he believed, had to be maintained, not only by those who were oppressed, but by those who understood the machinery of oppression and chose not to benefit from it. Einstein never claimed leadership in the civil rights movement. He understood his position clearly. He was not living the daily consequences of American racism. He did not mistake empathy for equivalence. What he claimed instead was obligation. "I know what it looks like," he said once, referring to the early stages of systemic cruelty. "And I know what happens when people wait too long to name it." That knowledge shaped how he spent his remaining influence. When asked to endorse causes, he chose carefully. When asked to remain silent, he refused politely. When asked to compromise language, he declined entirely. His words were measured, but they were never softened. Near the end of his life, reflecting on the American experiment, Einstein spoke with a clarity that stripped away illusion. Democracy, he said, is not secured by laws alone. It is secured by courage. Courage, in his view, was not loud. It was consistent. It was the willingness to stand in alignment even when the outcome was uncertain and the reward non-existent. Albert Einstein died on April 18, 1955. There were no grand political statements issued at the time of his death. Obituaries focused on his scientific genius, relativity, time, space. The universe bent and measured through equations few could understand. His civil rights work was mentioned briefly, if at all. But history does not settle in headlines. It settles in patterns, and the pattern Einstein left behind was unmistakable. He had demonstrated that moral clarity does not require shared identity to be legitimate. That silence, when injustice is visible, is not neutrality. That intelligence, divorced from conscience, becomes decoration rather than force. His actions did not dismantle segregation. They did not end lynching. They did not deliver justice on their own. Einstein never claimed they would. What they did was place responsibility where it belonged, on those with power, on those with voice, on those who understood and chose anyway. African American leaders who had known him remembered not his fame, but his steadiness. Marian remembered a door opened without debate. Students remembered tuition paid without recognition. Colleagues remembered a man who did not confuse brilliance with exemption. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois later wrote that Einstein understood America's racial problem more deeply than many Americans because he recognized it as structural rather than accidental. That recognition mattered because structures do not collapse from awareness alone. They collapse when awareness is paired with refusal. Einstein refused. He refused silence. He refused distance. He refused the comfort of being admired while injustice persisted nearby. In doing so, he placed himself not above the struggle, but alongside it, aware of his limits, clear about his role, and unambiguous about his responsibility. His legacy in civil rights is not found in monuments or organizations bearing his name. It is found in precedent, in the record that shows what it looks like when someone with nothing to gain chooses alignment anyway. That record remains. And it asks the same question now that it did then, quietly, without accusation, without urgency, and without mercy for excuses. What will you do with what you understand? Einstein answered that question in his lifetime. He did not leave it open, and history noticed.